All right, class. Now we are further zooming onto the podocyte. So here you see one large, gigantic podocyte. And on the top, you see the podocyte cell body. And what I want you to notice is that, so let's say this is a podocyte, right? And these are the arms. And each arm is actually looking like this, okay? So that's how the arms actually look like for the podocytes, which you see here. Now, these extensions of the arms, so these extensions, these are called pedestals. These are called pedestals. And I want you to notice that the pedestals kind of interlock with each other. Do you see this pedestal and this one? They're interlocking with each other. As they interlock, they form a structure called filtration membrane. Class, excuse me, what? Ozzy, go to Dimi, Baba. Okay, Rian, please close the door. Okay, sorry. So they form something called filtration membrane. Now let's take a look. So these are the pedicels. And then down here we see the filtration membrane. Now remember, these interlocking pedicels do play a significant role in formation of this filtration membrane. The filtration membrane is actually made up of the fenestrated capillary endothelium. So this innermost salmon colored layer of cells, this is the capillary endothelium. Supporting the capillary endothelium, you have this basement membrane, right? And then these interlocking pedicels, do you see that? These are forming filtration slits. So take your two hands and try to interlock your fingers. That is what filtration slit look like, okay? So these filtration slits, the basement membrane of the fenestrated capillaries and the capillary endothelium together forms the filtration membrane. And the filtration membrane is really important because through these pores of the filtration membrane, all the substances are filtered out of the blood and dumped into the glomerular space. On your exam, I will definitely ask you a question about the filtration membrane. I'll ask you which are the components of the filtration membrane. Something like that. So you must know that a filtration membrane is made up of filtration slits, fenestrated capillary endothelium, and basement membrane. Plain memorize. Okay, so now we will talk a little bit more about the proximal convoluted tubule. The proximal convoluted tubule is lined by simple cuboidal epithelium with microvilli. Why do we have microvilli here? Think about it. Do we have selective reabsorption taking place at the proximal convoluted tubule? Yes. For reabsorption, so remember water, glucose, some amino acids, salt, most of the vitamins are being reabsorbed back into the system from the proximal convoluted tubule. And these things actually move from the proximal convoluted tubule into the peritubular capillaries, right? The exchange takes place between the tubule and the capillary network surrounding it. So the point is, the cells, so the cells lying like this, right? These cells have microvilli to increase surface area for reabsorption. That's why they have microvilli. It increases surface area for reabsorption. Okay. So from the proximal convoluted tubule, things move back into the peritubular capillaries, as I mentioned before. Looking into the nephron loop. So we are looking into the loop and know that the loop is lined by simple squamous and simple cuboidal epithelium. Okay, part of it is simple squamous, part of it is simple cuboidal. Now, surrounding the nephron loop, we have vasa recta. So the exchange essentially takes place between the nephron loop and the capillary network surrounding it, which is the vasa recta. The nephron loop can be divided into a descending limb, which is very, very permeable to water and water only, and an ascending limb, which is very, very permeable to sodium chloride. So as I mentioned in my diagram, This is permeable to water. So water is reabsorbed back as the fluid moves down, which concentrates the fluid. And then as the fluid comes back up into the ascending limb, salt is reabsorbed back, and that further dilutes the fluid. Looking into the distal convoluted tubule, this is the site for secretion. Remember, if you are healthy and if you are well hydrated, the excess hydrogen ions, excess potassium ions, and drug metabolites are dumped into the distal convoluted tubule from the peritubular capillaries. So things are dumped in here. However, under the influence of aldosterone, there can be sodium and water reabsorption from the distal convoluted tubule. And it is not only aldosterone, but ADH can also work on the distal convoluted tubule. However, I do want you to understand one thing. ADH mostly works on the collecting duct. This is where ADH works. Little bit of ADH can work on the distal convoluted tubule as well. But know that the distal convoluted tubule is the main site for aldosterone action. Okay, so don't worry about the bus thing. So now, remember, we looked into the point of kiss between the distal convoluted tubule and the afferent arteriole, and I did mention that this kissing zone or the site of kiss is really important. Why? All right, moving on to the concept of juxtaglomerular apparatus. Try to say it. It's juxtaglomerular apparatus. You do have to identify the different types of cells that make up the juxtaglomerular apparatus in your lab exam and lab quizzes. So it's really important to understand the function of these cells as well. Now, what do we see here? We do see the afferent arteriole, right? This is the afferent arteriole as labeled. Now, the afferent arteriole has these smooth muscle cells surrounding it, and these smooth muscle cells are actually modified, and these smooth muscle cells around the afferent arteriole are called juxtaglomerular cells. These juxtaglomerular cells, they actually can talk to another type of cells called macula densa cells. Now this tube right here, this is the point of kiss, right? So, okay, let me see if I can change color. Okay, this is where the afferent arteriole and the distal convoluted tubule kisses, right? That's a point of kiss. So the distal convoluted tubule, if you notice, so this part is the distal convoluted tubule. Good. It is lined with simple cuboidal epithelium. Good. However, I want you to notice at this part. Do you see that at this part the cells are taller? And these taller cells that are found at the junction of the afferent arteriole and the distal convoluted tubule, these taller cells are called macula densa cells. They are not cuboidal, they are columnar in shape. Together, the juxtaglomerular cells, which are the red ones, which are modified smooth muscles surrounding the afferent arteriole, the juxtaglomerular cells and the macula densa cells together form the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So these two together. And why is the juxtaglomerular apparatus very important? Well, here is the answer. When you have low blood pressure, you have low blood pressure, you have low blood osmolality, meaning there is less solute in the blood. Under these situations, the juxtaglomerular cells will be triggered. So blood flows through here, right? You agree. So there is blood here. And the low blood pressure is sensed by the juxtaglomerular cells. And the juxtaglomerular cells think that there is low blood pressure. I need to do something. So the juxtaglomerular cells oops, sorry, I made a mistake. Just let's rewind back. Okay, sorry, just got distracted. Okay, so we did mention which is the juxtaglomerular cells, which are macula densa cells. We are good with that information. Now I want the fluid flows through the distal convoluted tubule, and the fluid that is present in the distal convoluted tubule, if there is low blood pressure, obviously there will be less fluid flowing through the distal convoluted tubule, right? Again, if the blood osmolarity is low, those things are sensed by the macula densa cells. So the macula sensed by macula densa cells. So the macula densa cells know that there is low BP or low blood osmolality, and the macula densa cells think, I got to do something. These macula densa cells, which are the tall columnar cells, they talk to the juxtaglomerular cells. They say, hey, juxtaglomerular cells, I think there is a problem. I think this person is having low blood pressure. Can we do something? Then in return, so they talk to the juxtaglomerular cells, and in return the juxtaglomerular cells secrete an enzyme called renin into blood. This renin then activates a pathway called Renin-Angiotensin Pathway, which is a very detailed pathway. I'm not going over that, but this Renin-Angiotensin Pathway ultimately releases something called angiotensin 2, and this angiotensin 2 works on the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone. This angiotensin 2 also works on the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus then activates the posterior pituitary to release antidiuretic hormone. And both ADH and aldosterone work together to reabsorb sodium, water, that helps to increase blood volume and blood pressure. This is how the kidneys regulate blood pressure. On slide 1, we did say that kidneys also regulate blood pressure, and at that point I mentioned we will talk about this later in the chapter. So here comes how kidneys regulate blood pressure with the help of this juxtaglomerular apparatus. So let's review this one more time. The juxtaglomerular apparatus is made up of two types of cells. The first one is called juxtaglomerular cells, which are modified smooth muscle cells lining the afferent arteriole. The macula densa cells are tall columnar looking cells which line the distal convoluted tubule. When the blood pressure is low or when the blood osmolality is low, that is sensed by the macula densa cells, and the macula densa cells then talk to the juxtaglomerular cells, and the juxtaglomerular cells in return releases a hormone called renin into blood. Renin then activates renin-angiotensin pathway, and ultimately a protein is produced called angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 works on the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone. Angiotensin 2 also works on the hypothalamus, which further stimulates the posterior pituitary to release ADH. So these two hormones, ADH and aldosterone, causes the kidneys to reabsorb more sodium and retain water, and which helps to increase blood volume and ultimately blood pressure. This is how the kidneys regulate blood pressure in the human body. I'll start with a new video.